Hey everyone, and thank you so much for joining me today in this episode of CBD 101. My name is Erin, and I am the Manager of Training and Education for Nature's Ultra. And I am very pleased that I am joined today by David Little, Global Agronomist for Young Living.
Right here in this box, this bucket, I have some soil. And we're gonna dump that out a little bit, and I wanna ask what you notice. So as we pour that out, there's a lot of dust, there's some rocks, and there's a lot of soil.
It's dry, huh?
It's dry in general. What do you notice about this soil? The color, the texture, and what it looks like. Okay, now let's take a look at another soil type. And what do we notice about this soil? It's a little bit finer soil, it's richer, it's got a lot more organic matter.
Yeah.
One of the things that's really cool about this soil, if you just dig in and feel those two soils. So I would term these two soil types, this would be an inorganic soil and this would be an organic soil. And so one of the differences is the nutrient concentration and the ability of those soils to provide the nutrients to the plant. And so one of the things that we're studying is the impact of that.
Right.
How important is the soil type? And we're finding that the hemp plants really do prefer a moderate pH soil, which means from 6.5 to 7.2, right around a neutral pH. That's their preference. That's their happy zone.
Right.
Also, they prefer a very well-drained soil. And so what happens if that plant, let's take a look at this one. This plant's growing and it's got a well-drained potting mix at the appropriate pH, and also water quality becomes very critical. If that water is high in sodium or high in pH, it'll also have an impact. These were all planted at the same time. What's the difference? And how does that impact the quality of hemp? Those are the questions that we're asking at our corporate farm and that we're studying in our research. So you'll notice that these two plants have yellower bottom leaves and they're just not quite as developed. And the reason for that is that in this case, the water pH was too high. So we had an elevated pH in the water. It causes the plant to be a little bit stunted.
Right.
And not all of the nutrients that the plant needed could it gain access.
Right.
If the soil is not well drained and it gets wet feet and it stays soggy and it just holds it, the plant also is not going to grow well in those conditions. Both water and soil have the means to sustain and support life, but they also can get contaminated. And it might be contaminated by human input, or it may be contaminated naturally, like at a mine spoil or runoff, or there may be some heavy metals that are just native in the soils. And so we pull soil samples, we run water analysis and determine what is the quality of that soil and that water, and is it best suited for our hemp plants. So once we have our soil prepared and it's been tested, we know that our water quality is good, then we can take those seeds and we can plant them in about 1/2 inch deep. And so one or two seeds per spot, because you're not gonna get 100% germination. Not all the plants are going to come up.
Are you worried about the spacing of the seeds? I know that's really important when you're planting, right?
Yep, so once we get into the field, it's very important that we have about a 5-foot spacing between plants.
And why is that?
That allows the plant to really stretch out and just have all the room that it needs to grow.
And I remember you showed me the leaves of plants that were close together. The leaves tended to be very thin and narrow, right?
If those plants are planted too close or it's too hot, then the plant puts all of its energy into trying to develop new growth. And so with plants that are too close together, it doesn't get enough oxygen down in the depth in the body of the plant. Once those seeds are planted and they start to come up, we get a small 4-leaf seedling. Anytime between a 4-leaf and a 10-leaf seedling, those plants are ready to go to the field. So we could transplant these at 5-foot spacing out into the field for production. One of the other trials that we've been working on is planting direct seeding into the field versus planting transplants into the field. And there is a little bit of transplant shock that occurs to the plant when we transplant it into the field. So it's like, oh, I've been transplanted, and then it comes out of that and continues to grow.
Is that because it's getting direct sunlight too?
It's just like if I took you and shook you up and then set you down, you need time to settle.
Okay.
So I'm going to take this and shake it up. You know, if I take this plant out of the medium it's growing in, and you can see the little plant roots.
And long roots. I mean, you told me that these plants are going to, the roots are going to go really deep. It's a very resilient and sturdy plant, right? It's gonna fight for survival no matter where it is.
That's right. And so with that plant has now been disrupted.
Yes.
Right? And so I'll plant it back. It's going to survive, but now it's going through a transplant shock.
So what's going to happen in that shock?
In that shock, it's going to just pause. It's going to, like, it's interrupted its growth.
Yeah.
And depending on how severe that transplant shock is, it may take as much as a week to recover and continue to grow, or it may take a couple of days. It just depends on the circumstances.
Right.
How wet, how dry, how much sun, how much heat, all has a play.
Okay.
So soil quality, water quality, genetics,
Yeah.
all matter. Those are very, very critical, very important. But transplanting versus planting from seed at this point doesn't appear to have an impact on the quality of CBD.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Awesome.
So once these are taken to the field and transplanted into the field, or if they were planted by seed directly into the field, then we get into cultivation practices. And we'll talk about that on the next occasion that we're together.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for joining us today in this episode of CBD 101. Please remember to like and subscribe and join us in our next episode about hemp production with David Little.